Oh, you got it.
That's
You
fine.
get it out.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
Good afternoon. And it's nice to, thanks for the invitation from Mike and Dave. I may have seen some of you, I think it was in September maybe, when I gave a presentation to the Supper Club at the, gosh, what was the pizza restaurant over on?
Giovanni's.
Giovanni's, yeah, that's what it was. Okay. Anyway, I was, as Dave said, I was a lieutenant in the Navy for 5 years during Vietnam era. And by the way, I always like to know how many veterans are in the crowd, if any. Are there any of you guys here? Oh, good, well represented. So let me say that if there's anything that I say that inspires you about Veterans for Peace, we have applications here for you. If anything I say doesn't, just forget about it. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Vets for Peace. It started in 1985. It's an organization. We had members, when it first started, we had members as old as some vets who fought in the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939. We have a lot of World War II veterans at the beginning, a lot of Korean War, Vietnam veterans, I think probably dominate the organization. But more and more we're having young veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the conflicts in Central America during the 80s, a lot of peacetime Cold War warriors, as they say, are members of the organization. And one thing interesting, since last October, we've become an international organization. We have chapters in every state in the Union. We have a chapter that we just formed in London, and that is the Veterans for Peace of London. We're in the process of organizing a chapter in Ireland of veterans from actually British veterans and Irish veterans who live in Ireland. And I'll be going to Shannon, Ireland in March to meet with them to help in a demonstration again, which is called Shannon Watch, which is a protest against the use of the neutrality actually of Ireland by the U.S. military that sends planes through Shannon with troops going to Iraq and Afghanistan, and also sending people for rendition through those countries. And the people in Ireland have, and veterans there have protested against that, and a number of us from the States are going to go back over there. I was in London in April of last year to give a presentation at the launching of the London chapter of Veterans for Peace as well. The organization has 5 basic principles that we try to adhere to. And although we have a national office in St. Louis, the local chapters are given a lot of autonomy in how to implement those principles and how to introduce those in the various communities. You know, each part of the country is different, so different tactics work in certain places that might not work in others. Anyway, the 5 principles. First and foremost is well, I shouldn't say first and foremost, it's the first one. And that is to make the public aware of the true costs of war. Second, to refrain our government from covertly or overtly interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. Third, end the arms race. Eliminate nuclear weapons ultimately. Fourth, and the fourth principle is something that was added later on, not at the very beginning of the founding of Veterans for Peace, but came about later, and that is to assist and seek justice for victims of war and for veterans. And the fifth is to abolish war as an instrument of national policy. Now, I wanted to point out, and I think either Dave or Mike or somebody will make these available to you, maybe they already have. This is a copy of the quarterly report of Veterans for Peace. We send this out every quarter. You'll find a list of activities that our chapters are doing across the country. And you notice at the very top, it says exposing the true costs of war and militarism since 1985. That's one of our objectives, is to talk about those 2 issues. And secondly, a document that we pointed out to you, our paper, and I don't know if I bought enough. I grabbed as many as I could, but I have to save some for our own members. And it's the War Crimes Time. This is a great publication. Excellent articles in here about war, violence, how we're involved in it. It's a publication of the San Francisco chapter of Veterans for Peace in conjunction with our chapter in North Carolina. So they work together, putting this paper together every quarter. So those are two of the publications that we have. And there also is a little bit of a business card, I think, that may be around here that tells you when we meet, Tuesday nights, first Tuesday of every month. We have a great website. Let me tell you about that. Go to SDVFP.org. We have a young Iraq veteran who is an expert in computers. He put together this website for us, renewed it. We try to keep it up to date with a lot of articles, information about activities that are going on. And we have a Facebook page. You can find Veterans for Peace on Facebook, both the national chapter and our local chapter. So let me begin by just mentioning some things about the cost of war. I think probably everyone here, if I ask you what's the cost of war, the first thing you would probably jump to mind was, how about all the soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen that are killed in these wars that we're involved in, or the number that are injured, or the people that come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, or the tremendous suicide rate among our veterans. Do you realize this? Every 18 hours a veteran commits suicide in this country. Every 18 hours. Is that horrible? That's what's happening. That's what war will do to you, and that's what is even the burden that veterans face now, 3 and 4 trips back into war zones. There was a study done in a book called On Killing. Anybody ever read that book, On Killing? It's written by an Army Colonel, Grossman, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. He taught at West Point. He used this book to teach at West Point. It's required reading at most military academies. It's required reading by the Commandant of the Marine Corps for the Marine Corps. And in that book, they report of a study that when people were exposed to combat for 60 days, you're exposed to combat for 60 days, almost everyone goes insane for some period of time. Now, most of it is reversible, except, I shouldn't say not everybody, 98%. There's 2% that don't. Why do you think that there's 2% that don't? They already are crazy, absolutely. Those are the psychopaths people, and they don't suffer from the consequences. But 98% of the people will suffer psychological damage, extensive damage, from being exposed to combat for 60 days. And that is why. When you think about it, how many people think that most people are good, right? Peace. Are we all good or are we all bad? What's the consensus here?
Good.
Most people are good, right? If we were all bad, the consequences of war, if we were bad, we'd get mentally healthy from fighting in these conflicts, right? We're all nuts, let's all go to war and we'll come back and we'll even be better than when we took off. But most people are good and decent people, and we have to change their behavior in order to get them to fight in wars. The toughest thing to get for a military to do in a combat is what? What is the most important thing that the military has to do in order to get people to fight in a war? What is it? Brainwash, okay. What was that? Kill? Well, yeah, you gotta get them, be willing to kill other people. And so there's a process of that, right? Anybody that's been through the military boot camp and all that, dehumanize the other person so that you're not killing another person, you're killing something that has been dehumanized. So that's one thing. But I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this area, but I just want to point out, the most important thing? Love. Love is the most important thing that the military does. Think about it. What would you die for? Would you die to protect your family? Most of you would, right? Somebody breaks into your home, would you do everything you could to protect your wife, children? I think you would. So what the military does is create bonds of love between their soldiers. They care about each other, right? The Band of Brothers. Remember the movie, the TV series, The Band of Brothers. And if they've been in the military, most people who have been in the military will tell you of friends that they still maintain are some of their best friends in their life that they've known in their service in the military. I have one of my best friends that I served with in Vietnam. He's a Naval Academy graduate, lives in Annapolis. We still communicate. We're still good friends. We built a strong bond during our period of time that we served in Vietnam. So that's one of the things that the military does in order to get people to stand and fight and not retreat. There's an interesting story that was reported on the radio several years ago, just to give you an idea. This older lady, about 80 years old, was walking her dog, a little poodle, down the street. And charging at her was a pit bull. The pit bull came running at her. Now, if I was, a pit bull was running after me, what would be the normal thing to do? I'd pick up my dog and run away if I could, climb a tree, anything to avoid having to face that pit bull. But this 80-year-old lady couldn't do it. So what happened is the pit bull didn't attack her, it attacked the dog and grabbed her dog and bit it. And so what did the 80-year-old lady do? She reached down and bit the dog until the pit bull let go of her dog and ran away. How many people, that's an example of the kind of things that people will do to protect people and loved ones.
Poway versus London.
It's a what? But anyway, I was talking about the cost of war. I was talking about the principles and the cost of war. So we talked about those people who died, who are wounded, who suffer PTSD and that. What are other costs of war? I mean, that's an obvious thing. What, civilian casualties? You know, in World War I, 10% of the people who were killed were civilians. Nowadays, actually, in World War II was about 50%. Vietnam, it started to edge up to 75, 80%. Nowadays, it's about 95% or higher of all those in combat or in war zones are civilians who are killed. Tremendous cost of war. How about the financial cost of war? Think about this. We're spending $5 trillion in the war on terror since 2001. And let me give you, to bring it home, an idea about California. In California, the federal tax dollars that you pay, that I pay, here in the state of California, that are exclusively used for the prosecution of the Iraq and Afghanistan war since 2001. Not the military budget, not for the VA, not for Homeland Security, but for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. $165 billion. $165 billion is what we are in California. That's what our cost is. Now, juxtaposition that against the budget shortfall in California this year. And it fluctuated around, I don't remember what the last number was, but it was something on the order of 15 or $20 billion, right? That's what we had a shortfall. But we're sending $165 billion to Washington to help them fight wars, and we have a shortfall of our budget here of $25 billion in California. Now, I'm not suggesting that all that money will be coming back and we'll make it up. That's just an example of where priorities can go. How about the environment? War and the preparation war does tremendous damage to the environment. All you have to think about is nuclear testing, nuclear weapons. Look what happened in St. George, Utah in 1981. 50% of the people in St. George, Utah, downwind from the nuclear testing, were diagnosed with some form of cancer. And that was true, not that high a percentage, but it was true of people living in Arizona, in New Mexico, and elsewhere. Nuclear testing and weapons. What about landmines strewn across the world? The United States is one of the few countries that won't sign an agreement not to use landmines anymore. But there are millions and millions of landmines strewn across the globe. And they're in countries where people can't use part of their land because they know that there are acres or miles, or thousands of square miles where landmines, and they don't know exactly where they're at. And so populations are not able to use that land to grow crops, to raise their animals, to traverse through the area, to go to one part of their country to the other. And in some countries, they're forced to actually live in more crowded conditions and not be able to raise food because of landmines being there. Think about the end of World War II. We dumped millions of gallons of chemical weapons and other kind of munition stuff into the oceans. Think about the Pacific Ocean. Over 1,000 ships were sunk during World War II, Japanese and American ships, that are at the bottom of the ocean, slowly decomposing, releasing oil, gas, and the toxins from those that's ruining our ocean. You could go on and on with the environment. The military is the largest producer in the world. From 2004 to 2007, the most carbon monoxide produced in the world was in Iraq from the military. That was
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange. There's another one. I had my wife and I visited Vietnam a few years ago, and we went to the War Museum in Saigon. And our tour guide didn't want to really take us there. They have a tremendous display about Agent Orange and the impact of Agent Orange on the deformed fetuses. There are actually models there. You can see a whole room, a gallery devoted to just the effects of Agent Orange. That's and our own troops and our subsequent generations, children of troops who were exposed to Agent Orange. Finally, with Veterans for Peace being a prime pusher, or one of the organizations pushing for it, we've got legislation, 2 bills that were passed to help veterans and their descendants, and also people in Vietnam to help them that were hurt, damaged, and injured, and suffer the consequences of the exposure to Agent Orange. So that's an example. The last one that I'm going to talk about is civil liberties. This we all know. Anytime there's a war, you can count on this. Your civil liberties are going to get taken away little by little by little. The problem with that is, of course, is that it's hard to get them back after the war. You can look at the Civil War. And of course, this was constitutionally prohibited, not prohibited, but permitted. And that was that Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War, but the Constitution in times of rebellion does permit it. The fact that it was permitted doesn't alter the fact that you don't have it available to you. Think of what happens, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit later on here to add on to that, is because there are 3 things that I want to get to eventually. It's about just drones, the National Counterterrorism Center in Washington and what they're doing, and a treaty that most of you never heard of that abolishes war, that would, if we followed it, wouldn't get us, we wouldn't get any of these wars. We just ignore it. And it's a treaty on the books signed in 1929. I'll get to that. But anyway, so those are some of the consequences of going to war. And you can probably think of more than I did. The cost of war. So let's take a look at this whole concept of peace. You know, I was walking through the airport going to a convention, Veterans for Peace Airport. I had a shirt on similar to this with the symbol Veterans for Peace on it. There was a guy there looking at me and he goes, "What's this Veterans for Peace stuff?" You know, the idea that veterans could be for peace was apparently a foreign concept to him. And I thought, and we tell people that in our organization, if you're a veteran and you're not for peace, what in the world are you for? So anyway, don't you think in this country, here's what I think. The idea of peace and war kind of get jumbled up together, right? There's always this, you don't seem to be talking about war unless you're peace. The avenue to peace is through war. And think about this. Think about how many people read the book 1984. Anybody ever read that book? Yeah, a lot of people, right? 1984. You remember those? It's a great study of propaganda, isn't it? You know, the use of propaganda and fear. Fear is a great thing the government uses to keep people in line. And that was that book, although a fictional account. And of course, we wouldn't be so duped today, would we? But anyway, you remember the Ministry of Truth in the book? The Ministry of Truth's job was to rewrite the history books to conform to what the party line was. Or the Ministry of Love. Remember what they did? They were in charge of political torture. And of course, the Ministry of Peace was responsible for waging war. And so these things that people normally think of, why, you know, that doesn't make any sense to me. But if you get enough propaganda, you get enough fear, people begin to buy into the government's line, right? War is peace. That was the slogan in the facade of the Ministry of Peace. War is peace. Strength, or ignorance, is strength. Freedom is slavery. Freedom is slavery. Those were the slogans that they had, and people go, "Oh, yeah, I guess that's right." Now, I'm not going to get into the story about what behind that and why those monikers were used. But think about how we use that in our own society and in the military itself. Let's go back to 1844. We had the largest naval cannon in the world aboard a ship in 1844. And what was the name of that cannon? Anybody have an idea? If you guessed Peacemaker, you'd be right. In 1872, Samuel Colt developed the Colt 45. It was the official sidearm of the United States Army from 1872 to 1897. It was called the Peacemaker. In 1949 to 1959, the United States fledgling and developing Strategic Air Command had a B-36 bomber. and it was called the Peacemaker. And we developed a Nike missile, right? Carried multiple warheads, atomic warheads that could strike and was on the land-based weapons. It's been since dismantled, I believe, in the mid-90s, but it was called the Peacemaker. If you say that, you're right again. And of course, the Strategic Air Command, not wanting to be outdone by any of this, said, well, we've got to come up with something that sounds good here. And so the first idea that they had, which didn't work at all, was that we will say our motto will be, war is our profession, peace is the product. And boy, they got a lot of bad public feedback on that. They said, oh, back to the drawing boards, we can't use that one. That sounds really too real. So let's change it. So they came up with one that they used, and that is, peace is our profession. Peace is our profession. While their B-52 bombers are in the air carrying nukes that would destroy the world on the way to Russia or China and in the air there. So peace is our profession. So, as I said, you know, we're too smart to fall for these kind of things that the government puts on us. But what about this term? And when it comes to the drones, anybody ever heard we're killing militants, right? And we're not killing civilians, right? That's the thing now. You know, the government here will say, the Obama administration is, the civilian casualties are so small, it's not even worth keeping track of. But studies, and I'll talk about the Stanford and New York Law School studies and the study by the Bureau of Investigation in the United Kingdom that disputes that. And it was just announced in the New York Times today, I believe, or yesterday, Ben Emerson, the United Nations rapporteur for assassinations and extrajudicial killings, has said that the UN is going to launch a 9-month study into drones and how they're used and what the governments are doing and what rules they're following or not following in killing of a lot of innocent people. So the idea of keeping these numbers low, in May of last year, I think it was, the New York Times said that the way the Obama administration would handle that is that anybody who was in the blast range of a Hellfire missile, once it's shot, is considered, if they are an adult male, they are considered a militant. And that if you have, and the only reason they would not be a militant is that posthumously, if somebody comes forward and says, no, they really weren't a militant, the guy was a school teacher going to teach class, oh, well, maybe we'll reconsider. So think about the logic of that. Is that something, you know, American people, what do we do? Okay, yeah, well, that makes sense, sure. Just anybody who happens to be around, we'll just call them a militant, whether we know that or not. And think about the report in the paper today. There was another 4 strikes in Yemen in the last 24 hours. And who were the people they killed? They really don't know for sure. Some of them, they say, were suspected Al-Qaeda in Yemen. They have no idea whether they're killing these people, who they are killing. According to the Bureau of Investigation in the United Kingdom, about 2% on their studies, they've done a lot of in-depth studies on about 2% of those who are killed in these strikes are high-value Al-Qaeda targets, high-value, 2%. So 98% of the people are being killed are either what we would say possibly suspected militants or civilians, innocent people. The Stanford Law School and the New York Law School had a combined study, and probably the reason they were involved in this is that Phil Alstein, who is at the time the United Nations rapporteur for extrajudicial killings and assassinations, was teaching at the law school at New York. And so what they have, after 130 interviews with politicians on both sides in Pakistan, those with military, intelligence forces, people whose families were killed, medical personnel, lawyers, legislators, people in the government, 130 of those, they decided that what they could glean from all the information that they did in this intense study was that well in excess of 3,000 people have been killed in Pakistan, in the area called Waziristan. Thank you. I knew I had it, but Waziristan. Okay, over 3,000, and of that, almost 900 of those are civilians. So about 1 in 4 of the people getting killed are civilians. And what a great way to continue with the endless war that we have, right? You kill some, that you think are enemies, and you kill a bunch of people that are civilians. And then those civilians and who are killed, the families of those people turn in to hate America, and they go out and they join the Taliban or whatever organizations. And so we have, well, there's more people to kill. So the more people we kill, and on and on and on it goes. So we'll be involved in these endless wars by our own willingness to target and have no real plan on who we're going after. Well, we do have some kind of a plan, and I'll tell you about that with the Center for Terrorism and what they do to keep track of us and what they do to keep track of the people that we're trying to kill. So, what's the legal justification, the legal authority? Yeah. Am I running out of time?
Sorry to break in, but you're on the drones, and you're a veteran, and talked to a lot of people. Are you aware of whether or not anybody in the military chain of command, from the president on down, is concerned about their complicity in these war crimes under the Nuremberg Conventions?
Am I aware of that?
Do you know if anybody has any concern about the fact that they're complicit in the war crimes?
Well, you know, in the stuff that I have read about that, yeah, there are some people in the administration, unnamed people, who have argued against that. I mean, they haven't won the day, but there are some people. Now, who they are exactly, I don't know. And
well, I was specifically talking about the military chain.
Oh, yeah, the military.
Are they completely clueless, or?
Oh, I don't think they're clueless at all. I don't think they're clueless.
Are they concerned about being called to account?
Probably not right now. I think they ought to be. But the question, here's a way to look at that question. Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that's going to be is how cooperative will the United States government be with the United Nations rapporteur on assassinations and extrajudicial killings when they look into the 9-month study they're going to be on drones, and they're going to concentrate on the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel. Those are the countries right now that are using drones, and those are the people who they're going to try to get information out. What are the standards that you use? What is the legal authority and justification for it? So I think as that study unfolds and the information, their study comes out, how cooperative the United States will be, I think will be a very interesting question to face. But let me talk to you about the domestic justification. The legal domestic justification for it is still founded in AUMF, the Authorization for the Use of Military Force of 2001, which was renewed in 2012, which authorized all reasonable and necessary force to go after those responsible for 9/11. Now think about that. Most of the people that we've been told about, that have, they highly publicized, Osama bin Laden. We know that the guy who is supposed to be the mastermind with all of this is in Guantanamo awaiting trial. We're told that most of the leadership has been assassinated or taken care of. And I suspect that these people that they're killing in places where we're not even legally at war, like Yemen, Somalia, Mali, the Philippines, and using drones, and about 80 other places around the world that we have special ops going around that you don't know about, that the American people don't know about, and there's no congressional oversight, and there's no congressional authorization for any of this stuff going on. So, let's see, what was I talking about there? I was just going to say, the legal justification for it. Then now we got to look at the international law. How does that apply to all of this? So, in international law, if you're in an area of armed conflict, and by armed conflict I'm using this term as a place in which there are some legal justification for the force to be there, like the United States. And maybe the closest argument that you can make is that there's some legal justification for us to be in Afghanistan, because we went there, we had UN support at the end of the war. The goal was to get Osama bin Laden. We probably overstayed our welcome there, certainly. But let's just assume that there's some legal justification for that. Now, here's what international law requires. If you are delivering lethal force in an area of armed conflict, you have to be in the military. The military can only deliver lethal force in an armed conflict. Central Intelligence Agency people aren't supposed to be doing anything like that. And certainly the people that are part of Blackwater, that are still assisting the United States. That's contrary to our own laws and international law. Have civilians involved in the military kill chain that they call it. The chain of responsibility for who fires the missiles. We had somebody from it was reported in a great book, if you're interested, called Drone Warfare by Medea Benjamin. And let me mention right here, Medea Benjamin is she's a co-founder of Code Pink, and she's going to be here in San Diego April 4th through the 7th. Mark this on your calendar. We're going to have a major anti-drone demonstrations in San Diego, workshops, protests. Veterans for Peace right now, every Thursday at General Atomic in Poway, we demonstrate out there in opposition to drones. Not just the use of drones in warfare, but the use of drones domestically. We're going to have $12 billion this year going to be spent on domestic drones. We have no idea, there's no controls over where that information is going, what kind of, what they're going to do with it, who has access to it, or how they're going to use it. So $12 billion, your money, or money somewhere, is going to be used to support the ability to enhance our spying on the American people if the government decides that's what they want to do. So anyway, war zones. So now we've got these people going into Yemen and let's say Yemen and Somalia. Yemen, Somalia, and Pakistan are really under the control of the CIA. They're the ones that are doing the damage in those countries. Mostly the military is involved in Afghanistan. Now, that's legally permitted. And I mean, as Phil Alston, who is the rapporteur I mentioned earlier on extrajudicial killings for the UN, said that except for areas of armed conflict, the use of drone attacks, deadly, lethal attacks, is almost always illegal. There is no justification under international law to use that. And he's an international law expert working for the United Nations. He isn't now. There's a new, Ben Emerson is the new rapporteur in that area. But he says there's no legal justification for doing what we're doing in places where there's armed conflict. So, the problem with drones, Peter Singer, who wrote a book called Wired for War, he said the problem is that it makes war seem costless. A brigadier general of the British Air Force in Iraq said the problem with drones is there's no heroism involved in any of this stuff. There's no great anything to do like that. The American people, as Singer says, are shut off because we don't know about it. We are insulated from the real toll that war takes. And as long as we're insulated from the toll of war, what does that mean? It means that we don't have the political checks and balances on these endless wars. We don't have it. And the governments learned from that, haven't they? They learned from Vietnam. Because in Vietnam, we had the draft, which was certainly an aspect of of stopping that war. But during the Vietnam War, you could turn on the nightly news and there's Walter Cronkite showing you helicopters bringing corpses back, wounded soldiers. It was on the news every night. Now, I was only here part of the time, and I was over there most of the time. But, you know, the times that I would come home and I'd turn on the TV set and I'd look and go, what more are they talking about here? We're making progress. What are these people being fed? And you would see that the American people gradually got upset about the war. They gradually began to protest. And why? Well, certainly, kids who were sitting in their college dorm watching the nightly news, they're saying, holy Christ, that could be me in a couple of years. I could get killed. And their parents at home watching the TV said, wow, that could be my kid in a few years. We got to stop this nonsense. There's nothing happening. We're not winning anything. People are just getting killed. But the government said, you know what, when we go to war again, we're not going to allow this kind of stuff to happen. So when we went into Iraq, you know, there was a blackout on the news. Nobody could go into Iraq ahead of the troops. There was no ability to photograph the caskets. They were arriving in Dover Air Force Base in Delaware during most of the war. The president said, that's all privacy, you can't see that. We don't want to expose the American people to the real cost of war. And so as long as we're insulated, what were we told? Just go shopping. And as long as you're shopping and doing all the kind of things and you get distracted, the government can run off and do whatever they want to do. And that's what they did. Same thing in Iraq, or when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan. Also, we had the embedded reporters, right? Embedded. And what do you think the embedded reporters? What side are they going to take? They're buddying up to these Marines and soldiers because they're going to save their life. You think they're going to be reporting on stuff coming back here? Everything that you read, I'll bet if you look back and think about it, everything you read from or heard from embedded reporters had a positive spin to it, that this is going good, our guys are really, they're tough, and they are tough. And they're doing the best job that they can. You got to be proud of them. And in the military sense of that, I mean, they were doing the job that they were trained to do. You know, you can't argue against the fact that our military folks are well trained. They follow orders. They do things that sometimes they're not supposed to do, which happens in all wars, and particularly when people go back at time and time and time again. Things fall apart. So, what was the thing that turned everything around in Iraq? You know, people started, when we started to get a whiff of something. What was that?
Weapons of mass destruction.
Well, that was certainly one of them, wasn't it? Weapons of mass destruction, that's right. When there was no weapons of mass destruction, people started going, wait a minute, have we been lied to? What about Abu Ghraib? Well, that really set off a firestorm, didn't it? All of a sudden, we were seeing on television the torture that we were doing to the people here. And it was contrary to our ideals. It was contrary to what Americans believe in. You know, back in 1954, General Eisenhower asked the Central Intelligence Agency to explain why it was that the countries in the Middle East did not like the United States. 1954. And what do you think the answer was? The answer was that the Middle East people didn't like us because we suppressed democracy, we overthrew democratic governments, we were not in favor of the economic freedom that the people there had. We wanted it all to ourselves, right? We overthrew governments that the British and American oil companies wanted to have the oil coming from Iraq. They did not want the government of Iraq to have any say in that, so we convinced Eisenhower and the CIA and the British were very prominent in that to overthrow the government of Iraq. And so, is it any wonder that the people in Iraq said, and the people in the Middle East, and it's a support for Israel, our unabashed support for Israel in blocking any attempt to require them to follow any of the UN resolutions. That is a factor. So in 2004, George Bush asked the question, why do they hate us? And he said, let's go to the CIA again. And what do you think? You think the answer was any different? Not at all. The answer was the same thing. They hate us because of our policies, not because of our freedoms, but because of what we do. We don't live, when we don't live up to our ideals as a nation, you know, we talk about freedom, we talk about democracy, we talk about economic freedom, we talk about lifting people up by their bootstraps, giving everybody an opportunity. But when we do the opposite around the world, when people go, God, I thought America was this great place, and yet they come here and they bomb us, they frighten us, they overthrow our governments, they interfere in our life. We want them gone home, you know, out of here. A couple of years ago, I was giving a talk at San Marcos College, and I was there with a young lady from Afghanistan who was a student there. She came to the United States when she was 12 years old, about a month before 9/11. And so she was asked to talk quite often about her experience and what is it like in Afghanistan. And I had a chance to talk with her about that. And I said, well, because the only people here with her are her parents or her brother. All of her relatives, hundreds of cousins and grandparents and friends and all that, they're still in Afghanistan. And she says, I talk to them quite regularly, and if I'm going to give a talk, I always ask them, hey, Uncle Joe, or not Uncle Joe, but whoever, Uncle, what's the deal here? What's going on there? What should I tell the Americans? Because you know what the people here are going to say is, hey, how we doing? How we doing over there? He said, tell them to get out of here.
Yeah.
And won't there be some bloodshed, though? I asked her the question, will there be bloodshed if Americans leave? She says, oh yeah, they all know that. But they will at least get the opportunity to arrange the society in the way they want it, not the way we want to impose it upon them. So they're willing to suffer through that. And she said the other thing that Americans don't understand is that we're a tribal group of people. And many of our tribes don't get along with each other. We don't like each other. We don't want a strong central government. We don't trust Karzai. He's corrupt. 98% of the people are poor. And so if you can just leave and let us form the kind of society that we do, and maybe we'll have to do it by bloodshed, we'll kill people, but ultimately things will settle down and we'll go back to living the way we have for centuries without interference. The only time that we come together is when the Americans come or the Russians come or somebody wants to take us over. And nobody's been successful at that yet, going all the way back to Alexander the Great and others. So that's one of the problems that we have obviously. And the drones are contributing to that, and they're going to continue to contribute to that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months as they do the investigation. So let me move on to the last two things that I just wanted to mention. This is the National Center for Terrorism. How many know about that organization? Nobody know about the National Center for Terrorism? Yeah, some folks do. Okay. National Center, it has basically two functions. One of the functions is that they are a clearinghouse for kill lists of the Pentagon and the CIA, like who do we want to kill with our drones? You know, what countries and what people are there that we want to eliminate? And so that information is fed into the Counterterrorism Center. They developed what is known as the Disposition Matrix, which is a way of analyzing all this stuff. And then, of course, once they get this information, they're very close to the White House across the Potomac, so they go right over there with their list and they give it to the president, and he gets to select the list of people that are high-level people that he wants, if they can find any that should be killed. Some of the low-level stuff he leads up to the National Counterintelligence Agency to do. But the second thing that they do, and it really affects all of us here, is that they data mine billions of bits of information about all Americans, innocent Americans, you know. What's your medical records, your travel plans, if you write an editorial against the government in the paper or maybe in favor of the government. They just pick up information. Now, the bad thing that's happened is that even when they were doing it in the Bush years, they had a 180-day limit on what you could retain. So after 180 days, you had to get rid of it. President Obama has no longer, he has upped the ante, it's now 5 years. So now they can collect more data and more information about you and me, and it's in those little computers. And you know, it's kind of frightening when you think that the president, as the ACLU says, has based on a court decision where they said the president has the right to decide who he wants to kill. Even American citizens, you know, like Al-Awlaki and his 16-year-old son, they had, you know, there was no due process here. Under the Constitution, they would really be entitled to that due process of law. But that was just thrown out the door. And the 16-year-old boy was killed. For what reason? The White House press spokesman said, after he had left that position, and I'm trying to think of his name, I can't, he was the first guy, he says, well, he had the misfortune of having a not too good father. Oh, that's a great answer, right? Killing innocent people. So that's what happens. So that's what's going on in the Counterintelligence Center of the national government. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, how are these domestic drones going to play into all of that? $12 billion spent next year. The Homeland Security encourages and works with local police forces. I'll tell you one thing, I'm concerned about the military, and that's what Veterans for Peace is, but I also have a real life concern about the militarization of the police. It bothers me that they're like an army, and they do all this training and crowd control. Who do you think they're trying to control? The mafia? No, you and me. That's what they want to be. That's what they want to be able to control. So anyway, that's what they're doing. The final thing I just want to mention here, and I probably talked way longer than my time, and if I have, just tell me to stop, is the Kellogg-Briand Treaty. Anybody ever hear of that? Kellogg-Briand, I think most people have not heard of it. Let me just tell you a little bit about it. Kellogg-Briand Treaty was signed in 1929, and it was ratified by the United States Senate by a vote of 85-1. And of course, as you know, under Article 6 of the United States Constitution, a treaty that is ratified becomes the supreme law of the land. It's not a federal statute, it's above the federal law, but the federal statute, it becomes part of the supreme law of the land. So, the Kellogg-Briand Treaty was really imposed on the government in large measure by a huge peace movement in this country following World War II, or World War I. That was the war to end all wars, everybody thought, and the citizens of the United States, when you got the American Legion and the Daughters of the American Revolution and the Women's Peace Organizations and all these other organizations to agree that a treaty banning war and abolishing war should be governed, you've done something. That may not happen again, but that happened in the 1920s. It's named after Frank Kellogg. Frank Kellogg was a former senator, a Republican senator from Minnesota who became the Secretary of State. Briand was Aristide Briand, the Foreign Minister of France. That treaty provides two very basic and simple things that we have blithely ignored. Number one, and let me tell you about the signatory nations. When it began, it was negotiated between the United States and France, and we offered, the countries offered any nation in the world that wanted to could sign on and adopt that treaty. So what happened is, I think there were 12 nations in the beginning, and it was Great Britain and Germany and Japan and Russia and China and a whole bunch of nations. Well, since that time, about over 60 nations, which includes mostly all the NATO countries, Australia, China, Russia, Japan, of course, still in there, and Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, all those countries are signatory nations. So what does it provide? It provides, first, that the signatory nations agree to abolish war as an instrument of national policy. They will not use war. Secondly, they will resolve every conflict that they have by peaceful means. They pledge to do that by peaceful means only. When Frank Kellogg, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for his part in this treaty, spoke at Oslo, Norway in 1930, he told the assembled people there as he accepted this award that the nations have outlawed war as an instrument of policy. We have gotten rid of it. There was a movement called the outlawry movement in the 1920s that was responsible for a lot of the push on this. And William Stimson, who was the Secretary of State at the time and later Secretary of War during the Roosevelt years, wrote an article in Foreign Affairs magazine in 1932 and said, this treaty effectively outlaws war. We should not have war. The nations have finally agreed that we're not going to do it. Has it ever worked at all? It did work one time. When Russia tried to invade Mongolia, the nations of the world said, hey, wait a minute, Russia, you signed this treaty, get those troops out of there. And so what happened? Russia got their troops out of there. But then, that sort of went by the way. The people, going to war was more important. The military-industrial complex that we were warned about, the munition makers and all those people, war is too profitable to let it just disappear off the globe here. So that treaty is still in effect, and there's a great book that I would urge you to read if you have more interest in it. It's by David Swanson. David Swanson's a member of Veterans for Peace. It's called When the World Outlawed War, or When the World Ended War. One of those. It's a really interesting book. It gives you the history about how this treaty came about and the players that were involved in that decision. So, I've talked about a lot of stuff. I probably ran well over my time limit here. I apologize for that if that's going to hurt your time. But let me just say this: if any of you veterans or even non-veterans, we have associate members, and this year at our national convention, we adopted a new bylaw that allows our associate members to now be voting members. It used to be just veterans who could vote, but they're now allow associate members to vote as well. So if you're interested in what we're doing, I certainly welcome you to join with us. We meet the first Tuesday of every month in San Diego. Go to our website, SDVFP, San Diego Veterans for Peace, SDVFP.org. You can find a lot of information there about what we're doing. We're going to stay in the fight. We're going to go protest against the government. We're going to find things that we shouldn't be doing and have them do it right. It's time to follow the Constitution, isn't it? Isn't that what we all are here about? Thank you very much.